All right, everybody. We are going to keep the AI train rolling with our next session, a fireside chat on building Bubble apps powered by AI. So I'm personally very excited for this session as this has become our fastest growing use case, which is pretty cool to see. So developers James and George and project manager Emily are going to get into how power users build AI apps on Bubble and share some tips on how to properly leverage the platform. So please help me in welcoming James, George, and Emily.
Thank you. Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AI Fireside Chat. So this is a bit of a follow-up session to last month's webinar that was on AI. So it's just to give you a little bit of an intro to it. But we're going to try and cover kind of AI and Bubble from starting off at a broad top level and then getting down into some quite technical stuff. I guess just to kind of set expectations, we're not going to be talking about those AI features that were announced yesterday. We're more talking about using other AIs like OpenAI, Anthropic, things like that with Bubble and all the cool stuff that you can do. We're going to look at how you can use AI not only to accelerate how you build apps in Bubble, but we're also going to talk about some of the kind of cutting-edge stuff that you can actually do with AI in your apps. And we're going to go beyond chatbots in this one, I think. So there's some really cool stuff that we're going to dive into. And at the end, we're going to take some questions. So if you have any questions along the way, keep those for the end, because I'm really excited to hear what everyone thinks. Just a quick couple of intros. So I'm James Davenport. I'm the founder of UserLoop. It's one of the leading Shopify apps for collecting customer feedback. Built with Bubble, has a ton of AI functionality in it, so I've been doing quite a lot with it. Before that, I was a product manager for 10 years. I've been working on UserLoop for about 2 years. And I'm also one of the co-founders of CreateWith, which was the UK's first ever NoCode and AI conference. And then we've got our amazing panel here. So we've got Emily Bennington, who's a project manager for AI at Cody Technologies, who are a gold-tier Bubble agency based in Los Angeles, started about a year ago.
Yeah.
And Emily's been helping loads of clients to kind of realize the potential of AI in their projects. So that sounds really, really awesome. And then we've also got George Collier here, also from the UK. So I think we've got quite a good representation from across the pond here. He's the founder of Not Quite Unicorns. So he launched his Bubble agency just over a year ago, and his team's made up mostly of senior developers. So I've been following like the stuff you've been doing, and it is really incredible. And if you've ever been on the Bubble forums, then I guarantee you've seen one of George's amazing kind of in-depth posts, because I know they've saved me many, many times. And of course, he's got an amazing YouTube channel as well with over 1 million subscribers, which kind of blew my mind when I heard that. So that was really awesome. So really, really great panel here today. So really excited to get into it. We thought we'd start with kind of a bit of a feeling I think we've all probably had when we started building with Bubble. And like, what was your aha moment? So I'm going to start with Emily. Like, what was that moment that made you go, wow, this is truly an amazing thing?
Yeah, it sounds kind of funny to say since we're here, but I came to Bubblecon last year and got to speaking to lots of different people, both beginners, people who had been building on Bubble since, feels like when Bubble started, people working at agencies, people that were founders. And I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was everyone had all these different ideas in different industries, and seeing that come together in one spot really showed me the power of what Bubble could do, because it was people from different backgrounds, people with different ideas, and being able to see their ideas come to life so quickly in a lot of different ways, I think really inspired me and wanted for me to get more involved in Bubble and what Bubble could do. And I think the complexity and the diversity that something like Bubble can allow is pretty incredible.
I completely agree. And George, what was your aha moment with Bubble?
Yeah, I think for me, it's almost easier for me to describe someone else's. I was mentoring one of this year's Immerse cohort. And she was building basically a lead form for her internal tool for their company. And you could just see it on her face when it worked. She kind of had this, whoa, like she was taken aback by like all of this work that you're putting in. And it all of a sudden just comes together after you spent a long time debugging it and working out exactly what's not working and why. When it works, it's like, wow, and you realize what the power of what you can do with Bubble is.
Totally, and I think my aha moment, like from being a product manager, was when I realized I could build a feature quicker than I could write a Jira ticket. So I was like, okay, yeah, this is this is quite interesting. So that was my mind-blowing moment. Emily, I think if we go into a little bit about what's the impact of NoCode been on AI app development for you?
Yeah, I think that the impact of both AI and NoCode has been huge, as I'm sure a lot of you have experienced. I think the most obvious thing is just the speed in which you can build. I think you'll probably hear me say this a lot throughout the conversation, but being able to test AI tools, I think, is so key when you're building with AI. So with Bubble and with a NoCode tool, you're able to bring that AI idea to life so quickly and then start testing it, making changes, and those changes that you want to make within Bubble are quite easy to do. And I think that when you're using an AI tool, that testing phase is so key, especially getting feedback from users, yourself, and being able to make those changes. I think the second thing that's been a big impact, both with using AI and then on a no-code platform like Bubble, is just the low barrier to entry. There's obviously all sorts of complexity that can happen once you get more familiar with the tool, but it is pretty incredible that someone who's just even interested in AI and maybe how it could be built into their application can get into Bubble and add that in and use the plugins that are available, but also with the API connector. I think that barrier to entry is quite cutting edge and something that wasn't possible before something like Bubble.
Totally. I mean, it's that speed of iteration, isn't it? And bringing more and more people into building apps. It's increasing the number of software developers in the world. So that's a really great thing.
And I think that concept of increasing software ideas is inspiring to me because people that are in an industry, I think, are the expert in their own industry. So software developers can build for different industries, but when you can be in your own industry, building your own app, I think that's where technology is really going to thrive.
Absolutely, yeah. It's such an exciting time, and I think Bubble is just one of the fastest platforms to build AI stuff with. So it's so exciting. And I guess for George, what do you think the biggest advantages are of using a no-code platform to build AI apps? We know speed. That's obviously one, but there's a ton of advantages, aren't there?
I think all of the other advantages ultimately boil down to speed. So when we're talking about things like cost savings, reducing the risk of trying to build an MVP, or we're talking about flexibility, like yesterday it was mentioned earlier, that you can pivot very easily when you're building an app on Bubble because it affords you flexibility. All of that is because of the speed that development with Bubble allows you, and I think that's really what makes it powerful. If you build an app on Bubble, if you build a software as a service, for example, you are able to outpace companies that have been around for years, that have millions of dollars of VC funding, just because you're able to develop so much quicker.
Absolutely, and I see this in practice all the time where you look at people who are building with Bubble and they are shipping AI features like there's no tomorrow. It's absolutely amazing, and they are outpacing much larger teams with much higher, more funding in a lot of cases, and they're actually putting stuff out there, seeing what's working, iterating quicker, and ultimately we all know with startups, whoever can iterate the quickest often is going to get to product market fit the quickest as well. So yeah, super exciting. When someone thinks about integrating AI into their app, when should you think about that? This is both to both of you, but I think we'll start with Emily. Should you think about that at the start, or is it something that is an ongoing process as you building?
It's a good question, and I think that there's arguments to be made on both sides. I think I should start out by saying that when you are using Bubble, you can do it whenever. So if you have an app that's made already and you decide you want to put AI into your application, it's never too late to do so. I think there's something to be said about when you are starting out an application, having a really clear idea of how you want to use AI in your app. We talked a bit about not using chatbots as much, but I think that when you have a really clear vision for how you want to put AI in your app, what problem you're solving, how the users are going to be interacting with the AI within the application, I think it is really powerful when you're thinking about building workflows, setting up interfaces, the user experience. But I think there's an argument to be made that once you do have an application already made, there's some power in that maybe you have users already. Maybe then you have a specific problem that you want to solve because you already have your app built. It might just be a little extra work for you as a developer, but I do think that it's never too late. I guess I would say it's easier maybe at the beginning, but I don't think it's ever too late, and I think that's something powerful about Bubble.
100%. And as we're seeing, like the pace of change in AI, like the models are getting new capabilities constantly. So it is something that you've got to continually review. Would you agree, George? Like that's
Yeah, I think that as a rule of thumb, planning earlier is always better because it means you don't have to double back on yourself and change stuff that you've already built. So having a plan is always good, but it's never too late to integrate AI features. I kind of try and categorize apps into AI-first apps or AI-augmented apps. So an AI-first app would be one where that is the core feature, and that couldn't have existed prior to 2022. So I think your chatbots or AI writing long documents, those are AI-first apps. But AI-augmented apps, they're a lot more wide-ranging, and it's so much more than just adding chatbots to your application. You can augment existing features using AI and do that to kind of optimize your user experience. I think it's really helpful.
That's it, and I think having an awareness of what's happening in AI helps you kind of match the capabilities of the technology to user needs. Yeah. Because I think we've all been very tempted to go and add a ton of AI features to our app that look cool, but at the end of the day, they've actually got to be useful and drive more usage in the app. So I find that is that constant balancing between understanding the capability of the models and applying that to actually useful scenarios in real life, which is quite difficult sometimes. But for Emily, I mean, how do you decide if an AI feature will work in your app? Like, how do you go about that, kind of evaluating that?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest thing I would always recommend when working with AI, we spoke a bit about how AI is, in a lot of ways, really cutting edge. It's been around for a bit now, but there's so much changing every single day. Even yesterday, I think there was an announcement about the voice thing with ChatGPT. So I think that there's a lot of changes that are always happening. I always recommend kind of when you're starting out with an application, this is assuming you're starting from the beginning, you can call it an MVP, you can call it a prototype, but I kind of recommend building small before building big. So if you have an idea that's specific to AI, really putting that AI into place with the simplest interface that you can make and really just testing that, prompt engineering it to make it look and feel the way that you're wanting. I think with AI, pretty much, I would say a lot of things, if anything, is possible. But I do think, especially when you have a really innovative idea, there might not be something that you can kind of copy or reference. So I think when you do have a more innovative idea, it's good to be able to really test that idea and get it to work the way you want before fully building around, because my guess is that there'll be things you'll want to change and you'll get feedback on. So I guess we can call it an MVP, but I think just that idea of building small and then really seeing how it will work within what you're trying to build.
Yeah, and is that something you'd agree with, George, that you go through these kind of iterations and maybe even experimenting with different AI APIs as well to see which one will work best for a feature? Is that do you find yourself experimenting with different AIs? And
all the time. Every model will respond differently. Like, for example, I know now that Claude, for example, it seems to respond much more human-like. The language seems a lot more natural, and it doesn't have the telltale AI signs of the likes of ChatGPT. So by experimenting with different models, you're able to find different responses. And then making it easy to adjust how AI is integrated into your app is really important. So building it maintainably, making sure that it's easy for you to adjust the prompts, any other information that you're passing the AI will really save you a lot of time down the road and make sure that you can get the most out of the model that you're working with.
Absolutely, and I noticed one of the things I noticed when we on the live stream last month from some of the questions that people were asking was how do you, so maybe if you're reading a lot about AI and you're at the beginning of your kind of app building journey in Bubble, I guess to Emily, but how would you recommend people actually go about starting to learn about how to integrate their first AI API call into their app? Where would you recommend?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that there's a lot of excitement around AI, so being able to practically know how to actually integrate that. The biggest place that I would start, I mean, with Bubble, there are a lot of AI plugins that you can use, and I think those are really, really great for just even figuring out how AI works, how it can fit into your app. But the API connector is also a great way to get started, and there's so much documentation out there, both on OpenAI, Anthropic's websites that you can read through the APIs and learn about how specifically they work and how they would plug into your Bubble application. Also, depending on kind of how you learn, I'm more of a hands-on learner, so I do like to kind of get in there and work with it myself. But there are so many resources out there in terms of YouTube videos, like Reddit, everywhere that you can learn depending on how you like to discover things. So I think there's a lot of resources out there, but I do think getting in there and playing with it, Bubble makes it really easy to do so, and there's a lot of documentation about how to use specific APIs on the websites and how to plug them into Bubble. So I think there's, a wealth of knowledge if you're just getting started, and there's, ranging from beginners to people who are more advanced. There's a lot of information out there that you can connect with.
Yeah, there's just so much out there. The forum, YouTube, even...
Yeah, the forum.
Yeah, exactly, George, on the forum. There is so much out there, isn't there? So, and the community, everyone is always so helpful as well with any questions, even on Twitter as well. So, yeah, there's tons of help out there. So, I guess following on from that question for George, how do you decide... When you're looking at implementing an AI feature in Bubble, how do you decide between choosing one of those hundreds of plugins that are in the Bubble kind of plugin store versus going direct into the API connector and setting things up manually? And what kind of influences your decision over what path to go?
Yeah, so as a rule of thumb, as an agency, we tend to go for the API connector, and that's because it affords you more flexibility than you'd get with a plugin. So when you use a plugin, it's great to get started, and it's a very easy way to reliably integrate a certain feature because you know that when you use that plugin, as long as you follow the plugin's instructions, it will always work. So there's less room for error, I suppose. But with the API connector, you get more flexibility. So for instance, we had a client who we built an app that used retrieval augmented generation. They need to be able to return lots of memory from their knowledge base. If we'd used a plugin to do that, we would struggle to update that in the future. They messaged and said we need more memory returned. If we use, for example, the OpenAI Assistance API and an attached plugin, we can't customize that level of detail. But if we use the API connector, we can do that all manually and adjust every little thing so that it's specifically tailored for us. So if you want to get started, great, use a plugin. If you want it to be reliable or you don't want to just have to deal with the API connector and you know your use case is simple, go for it and use plugins. If you think that you might need anything more now or in the future, we tend to use the API connector.
100%. And one thing I use quite often with the API connector is ChatGPT is actually excellent at writing the actual, the requests to go in the API connector, and that, especially when you're filling out kind of variables that, putting things in square brackets and all that kind of stuff, it can save you a ton of time just that way. So that's another hack that I love using. Yeah. But for Emily, what kind of ethical and privacy concerns do you think people should think about when they're looking at integrating AI into their apps?
Yeah, I think those are important things to consider really when you're making any application. I think specific to AI, it's kind of a big topic right now. I think specifically speaking about privacy, having any sort of transparency with your users goes a really long way. I think having that transparency really builds trust. We've all probably had some exposure to AI, but for some of your users, this might be their first experience using AI in this type of way. So I think in terms of data, it's being transparent about what data is being collected, who is viewing this data, what purpose is them collecting this data serving, and then where is this access happening. So I think when you do have that transparency in terms of this data collection, it goes a long way with users, and it's also, I think, the ethical thing to do in terms of data transparency. I think that there's also kind of lots of ethical concerns in terms of AI in general. I think it's kind of an evolving conversation, but I do think the biggest thing that I really try to do when building for clients and even for myself is just making sure that that data transparency is really clear, and I think that goes a really long way with users, especially when we're talking about something like AI that's new to quite a bit of people.
100%. And things like getting your privacy rules right as well, making sure you're only sending the AI, the data that you need to the models and stuff like that, as well as you're always thinking about as an agency as well, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a really good point that you bring up, is that the data is only being used when it's needed. So you're not collecting data just for the sake of collecting data. And I think that doing that also goes a long way with users to feel like you're not, unnecessarily collecting data that you probably don't need.
100%. So for George, I guess if we're turning a little bit back to how what AI tools you use. So when you're developing on Bubble, what kind of AI tools do you use to help you? Like things like plugins, APIs, custom JavaScript. What are your kind of like top hacks for working with AI in Bubble?
Yeah, so you can use AI to help you build apps faster on Bubble. And I mean using AI to accelerate your editor experience rather than building apps that use AI. So one of the things that I like to do is using AI for email templates. It's dead easy to set up. They'll code pretty nice HTML email templates, which is just, you can do it. It's kind of fiddly if you do it all manually. So doing that kind of thing can accelerate it a lot. Now, one of the things which is people have been looking into recently is using AI to talk with your own Bubble database. And won't get into technical specifics, but you can do that using the data API or creating your own backend workflows and returning relevant data from them. I won't go into technical detail. It's much better suited for documentation or a forum post.
Yeah.
But if you want to chat about it, you can find me after.
Be waiting for that.
Yeah, I definitely want to learn a bit more about that, so we're going to have to follow up with that one. But I mean, so we said at the beginning I think we've all probably heard a lot about chatbots. That's where we all probably start with experimenting with AI APIs. But it would be great to dive in a little bit more to things like returning structured data from these AI models. For me, in my app, that's one of the most powerful things that you can do is returning structured data back to Bubble that then you can do other stuff with in your workflows. Things like translation, text-to-speech, vision, all these kind of things. These are some of the most exciting and mind-blowing things that you can do with Bubble. So, you've done quite a bit with structured data in particular, haven't you, George? What's your recommended way? Because I know there are many different ways, but for getting structured data back from an AI model into Bubble, how do you do it personally?
Yeah. So currently we have the limitation in Bubble that we can't deal with native JSON parsing. Maybe that will be added in the future. I don't know. But the way we get around that is through the API connector and calling your own backend workflow. Again, I won't get into too many technical details, but for our apps, we have one backend workflow. All it does is take a text parameter and return JSON, and then you can set up multiple API calls for each different kind of response type that you need.
Absolutely, and the one AI API that does return structured data back to Bubble is Anthropic. So if you use their tool calling mode, that returns it back and it formats in the API connector really nice. So if you use OpenAI, it's a bit more of a kind of a rigmarole to go through the backend a backend workflow and parse it. But it's one of these things that once you can get the hang of it, you can build stuff that you just couldn't imagine, and that goes beyond chatbots and that kind of thing. So it's worth learning how to do that, I think, isn't it?
There was an app that was posted on the Bubble forum recently, and I can't remember the name for the life of me, and you'll know who you are if you built it. But it was essentially a bit like Typeform, except you chatted with the form. So instead of having a fixed number of questions that you all had to respond, it would just ask, and then if you provided more information than you needed to, it wouldn't ask certain questions. So all the user would do is say, I want to find this information from the user. And then using Bubble, this is all entirely built on Bubble, they're able to create essentially a form where they can chat with the bot, and then it will return the structured data that they need, which I think was really clever. It changes how you think about forms. And it's kind of a little bit more than just a standard chatbot interface, but it still uses those LLMs.
Absolutely. And Emily, when you're working with your agency clients, do they have, what kind of AI models are they coming and asking you, or like AI services that they'd like to integrate? Is there one that really stands out? Or I guess which one comes up the most? And
I would say that's a good question. I think that for us, we mainly use OpenAI and Anthropic, just because for a long time it was all OpenAI. That was what we used, and that was great. And I think really recent, I would say for us in the past 4 months, we've really started diving in with Claude, because kind of what you spoke about, there's a lot more human-like, I guess I can say, features with Claude. So I would say it's those two are the main ones that we use right now primarily.
And it's just helping guide them through the understanding of what the capabilities of each of those, like why you might pick Anthropic over OpenAI for specific use cases.
Yeah, we kind of guide them through that process. So people usually come to us, I would say, with more of, some people have pretty specific ideas, but a concept of how they want to put AI into their application. Some people will come to us maybe just, I want AI in my app. I don't know what I want, but I want AI. And I think going through that process, both for your own app, but when you're freelancing or have clients, I think really getting down to what the actual use case of AI is. I think that AI is so powerful and can really change the way that our apps are working, the way that the development process works. But I think the biggest thing that I've seen and what I've seen, really smart companies do is have a specific problem that they're wanting AI to solve, and they've thought about kind of how to get to point A from point to point B. And for us, it's coming in, okay, this is the best solution for that specific problem. I think when it's a little more general, we can still get there, and I think that kind of is when you start having clients and freelancing where that more consulting part comes in. But I do think having that really specific concept of what you want to do with AI, then you can really point them to the model that you want to use and kind of make those decisions from there.
Absolutely, and touching on use cases, I guess, I think we've all probably seen some pretty incredible stuff being done in Bubble apps with AI. So for both of you, what is the most impressive things that you've seen people do with AI in Bubble? Two that come to my mind as people probably seen SynthFlow. That's like a really incredible example, and Better Legal doing legal documentation and legal assistance. Have you got a particular favorite thing that you've seen in a Bubble app, or you've done yourself as well?
Yeah, I'd have to be biased and say it's one of our own apps that we built. But they're able to write long-form project tenders. So essentially, governments require a long bid to respond to their project. It takes up loads of time. So we're like, can we use AI to get 80% of the way? And then we can, and it can analyze all of those documents and produce a really long kind of and robust project scope. And it's really good because we can now add things like image analysis, so it can look at maps in the government's request for proposal and respond to those, which is really incredible. There's still times, and all of you will have had this if you ever used AI previously, where you're like, wow, I actually just did that. And even if you've had that once, you'll find it again in the future as you try new things with AI, as the models get stronger, and you're like, wow, I didn't think it would ever be able to do this, and now it actually can. I feel like I'm seeing an incredible demo every other week of somebody building something amazing.
Yeah, I feel like I can't keep up even. It's amazing. Yeah, I completely relate to that point of just when you do the API connector and then you see it work, you're like, whoa, oh, I thought it could do that, but wow. I feel like I've seen a lot of different innovative uses with each little case, but I think that the concept that we spoke about earlier of that idea of unstructured data becoming structured data, as we kind of know, apps really run off of structured data, and you build interface around structured data. So I think that concept of being able to put unstructured data and have the AI return it as something that you can use in your interface for users, I find very innovative because it's just kind of incredible how quickly that process can happen. A specific example is kind of a fun one. It's just a personal project, but there's this app that is a AI personal trainer experience, and essentially what it does is it guides the user through an intro process. All of that is, it knows what information it needs to get, but it's all unstructured data, and what it does, rather than kind of behaving as a chatbot, is it gives you the information, which would be a workout plan in this case, but what's unique about it is that it is structured in the way that you've set up, so it will say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then it will have a quote or a little video, or it's specific to the user, it's specific to their needs, what their goals are, what equipment they have, things like that. But the AI knows what information it needs to get, it gets the information and it returns it as something that's tangible and that can come into your actual application user interface, and I think that that's a really powerful use of AI.
Absolutely. It's really quite incredible, some of that kind of stuff you can see, isn't it? And one thing that I personally use in Bubble a lot, because I think it's been touched on earlier, is the quality of the prompt that you give to the AI and the amount of detail in it has a gigantic impact on the quality of the response you get. And what I love about in Bubble, in particular, working with kind of conditional expressions, you can write branches that completely customize the prompt for every time the user makes a request. So whether it's injecting their own data into the prompt or tweaking it depending on what feature they're using or whatever, you can really, whenever I'm working with it, sometimes my prompts will be like hundreds of lines long, but then that means you're far surpassing the experience that anyone's ever going to get on ChatGPT directly, for example, because you're giving the model so much more information to work with that it's going to get a much better kind of output. So We're coming towards the question segment. So if anyone's got any questions, start thinking about those now. But I thought one last thing for the panel, I guess, what happens when AI goes wrong? And have you had experiences of hallucinations and problems with when working with AI in your Bubble apps?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, hands up if you're a Bubble developer in here as opposed to the founder. You're in the editor regularly. Yeah, it's quite a few people. It's very important that when you work with your clients, you tell them if AI isn't the right thing for a use case. We had a client recently who wanted to use AI to verify one-time passcodes, which is essentially just checking that 2 different strings match. Not a great example of where to use AI, so it's really important that you actually execute it in the right way. The other one is, has anyone ever left the API connector's parameter box private by accident so that their dynamic data doesn't pass through? 2 people. OK, it's just a me problem then. But essentially, I initialized this image generation API, and then I accidentally left the prompt private and deployed it to live. And lo and behold, the users didn't get what they expected. No matter what they asked for, all this AI image generator would do is cake, no matter what they asked for, which is pretty awful and an easy mistake to make. But fortunately, it's not as tragic as some other consequences of AI could be.
I can imagine that'd be quite confusing for the client, though. All they're getting is cake.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think we've all had some of those kind of stories. It's amazing. Right, I think we probably have got time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience. I think there should be, yeah, we've got some mics that will go around. So yeah, if you've got any questions for our panel on AI, it'd be great to hear from you. Cool.
Hi there, great panel, and thank you guys so much. Just had a quick question in addition to what you said about the pros and cons of using plugins versus the API connector. Are there ever additional privacy concerns to using third-party plugins, specifically with AI, that you don't have with the API connector?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, when you use an AI plugin, sometimes if it's supporting streaming, what it will do is it'll pass the data to a third-party API that's owned by the developer. And that's basically done so they can support the streaming function. Not all plugins behave in this way, but generally the best port of call if you're ever in doubt when you're using a plugin is to ask the plugin author, because they can set the record straight and give you the right answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Cool.
Yeah, it's basically on the same topic. You mentioned briefly the privacy rules, but how about the GDPR compliance? Is it like compliant at all? And how do you manage that with your customers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say in terms of actual privacy laws, there's a lot that's kind of ever-changing. So when thinking about setting up data security, there are some guidelines that you want to follow. So speaking about giving the users information on where this data is being stored, there's some laws about having it be able to be anonymous. I think that's also something that's important. Also having an option for users to be able to have their data be requested to be deleted is something that you want to think about. So you want to follow kind of security best practices within Bubble, but I do think when you are handling user data specific to AI, you want to make sure that you're compliant with kind of all the laws. I think that there's a specific in Europe, I can't remember the exact term.
Yeah, GDPR.
GDPR. We don't have that in the United States, but I think following any sort of specific privacy laws is really important, and especially when you're thinking about setting up data. So again, it kind of comes down to, I looked at this law really recently, it's like transparency, giving a lot of information on who has access to this information, making that data be able to be private, not having this stuff be available to the public, and I think the transparency thing, it really comes back to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And an additional thing that I always try and do is to, in general, run AI kind of functionality from back-end workflows as well, just as an additional step, so that there's no risk of doing things like exposing your API keys in the front end, and you're only kind of using any user data from the back end just as a kind of an additional layer of security. But in general, you've got to think about the same stuff applies as to building an app with or without AI. It's kind of taking user data privacy seriously and really spending the time to get it set up right.
Yeah, because I think with AI, people are, rightfully so, I think a little bit more concerned just like where is this data actually going. But I do think whenever you're setting up an application using AI or not using AI, all that data privacy is so important, especially when you start thinking about when you're handling more confidential data. So, I mean, even what we talked about yesterday, I think is so important when you're setting up an application.
Awesome. Any further questions? I think we've got one over here, one here.
So really in the same topic about privacy and security. So we are in a regulated environment, and we're trying to dabble in the different AI features that we want to add to our application. And we've successfully done some things where there's not really risk of data breach, because it's more generative text that we're getting from public information. But we want to start doing text generation on things that are inside the platform. So George, I think I'll be hitting you up afterwards. But the data has to leave our bubble environment or even our backend environment at some point. Yeah. So are there any infrastructures that you recommend for a regulated environment to start building these AI models on top of?
The answer, as with lots of all of these things, is it depends. Obviously, I can't give legal advice, but if you're working with an external API, it's a given that the data is going to go to that external API. Now, if you use an API like OpenRouter, for example, which allows you to connect to lots of different models, it's also going to pass through OpenRouter to that external API. So you need to think, if you're considering where is my data going, you need to look at the AI provider's own kind of data privacy guidelines and what they tell you. Everyone will be different. And then you can work out that that's okay for your app. Within your own app, you need to make sure that you have appropriate privacy rules set up so that users can only ever see what they should be able to see. But as long as your users know and agree in your terms of service to being able to send data to this third-party provider, which most kind of privacy policy clauses have, then it shouldn't be a problem. It depends on the type of data, of course, too. If you're building a health app, you're going to struggle to build a HIPAA-compliant app on Bubble. But every industry will be different.
Yeah, because everything, like OpenAI and Anthropic as examples, will have their own set of privacy rules that is built into their system. So you want to make sure you're familiar with that. And then when you're thinking about, because at the end of the day, you are using a third party, but those organizations are pretty rock solid in terms of their privacy rules.
Awesome. I think we've got time for one or two more. One more.
It sounds like you guys have been at it for a while with the AI APIs. I'm just curious to know how much of a constant learning curve. I signed up probably when ChatGPT kind of hit the mainstream media, and I haven't touched it since. But I get the impression that it's fast moving, and so you're going to have a lot of learning curves constantly, or not.
I think it is a never-ending learning experience. I mean, while we were sat here yesterday, I was reading the updates from the OpenAI event. Stuff is changing constantly. So yeah, yesterday we had some really exciting stuff with the advanced voice mode getting an API, O1 coming out, the O1 model coming out in the API. So this is all stuff, the second I get back, I'm going to be experimenting with in Bubble. But yeah, it's never ending, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, to speak to yesterday, it is funny because we went on a little walk just to speak about our panel and everything. And as we're walking, James is bringing up new things that are being announced. So in terms of the learning about AI, I think it's never ending. I think a lot of this is really new, and that's what's really exciting about it. So it's interesting to see how people are using it. I think that in terms of speaking directly to kind of the learning curve of it, I think that there's kind of two parts, especially within Bubble. Bubble is designed and is really great because it does have a low barrier to entry, and it works really well because of that. So if you are new to AI, or you're interested in it, or you're not quite sure, even if you want to build an app around AI, but you want to give it a go, I think that plugins are really great for that because it does the API call for you for the most part. And I think once you kind of get in there and you become more of an expert and you start using the API connector, I'm still learning new things all the time. So I think that maybe some people are more advanced, but I think anyone who says that they're not learning anymore isn't. I don't know if they're using AI.
Yeah, I think you're always learning with Bubble or with AI. I don't know everything about Bubble, and I never will do. and no one in this room will know everything about Bubble. Even the founders, there'll be stuff that they even don't know about it. You're always going to be learning, and there's always going to be new things which are changing, which you're going to have to adapt to. Like, a few months ago, I get a message saying, "Can we start analyzing images in the application?" I'm like, maybe I've never done that before, but sure, because it's a new feature, right? And no one is going to be an expert on a new feature, which is interesting. And it's a bit of an equalizer as well, because people in NoCode and in traditional development, they both have the exact same knowledge and experience of AI. Very few people have more than 2 years of experience developing with LLMs. So it's a level playing field, but working with NoCode and Bubble gives you the advantage to be able to work a lot faster and a lot more flexibly and build a product whilst risking a lot less than the equivalent traditional development team.
Yeah, I think working hand in hand with NoCode and AI is so powerful. And I mean, you kind of spoke a little bit about using ChatGPT in terms of prompts, and I think that that's a really good example. And if you are new to using AI, you're in the right spot. And I think that there's a really cool opportunity with Bubble to really be a pioneer for how we can build quickly and have ideas that we can really bring to market using AI, using Bubble. And I think it's such a powerful time to be working in software.
Absolutely. Cool, yeah.
Hi guys, thank you so much. One of the things that I encounter when I'm building this, using AI for the first time in an app, is that it's just so easy to do, and then I have my API set up, my key, and I'm curious though, like, with your apps, you have familiar and practice with scale, cost. What has happened when you have a lot of people using your app, and I'm sure that the limit on your API key gets reached. Have you any stories around like, oh no, like we need to do something about this? Because I could see it being really easy to like send a ton of tokens and get a ton back and all that. So I'm wondering what stories you have there.
Sure.
Do you want to go?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely experienced that. When you're doing tons of AI API requests, obviously it can mount up quite a bit. But the great thing about Bubble is you can plug it into like external services. So for example, I've started using Cloudflare workers quite extensively with Bubble to do a lot of the AI work inside the worker and return the results to Bubble. And that's helped me track the costs of running it quite efficiently, and also just to do slightly more complex things sometimes. So obviously in Bubble you can run multiple AI calls in a single workflow and take the results from each one and input those into the next one, and even use different models within the same workflow. But yeah, definitely just keeping an eye on your costs and making sure your API keys are secret as well, because we've all seen the horror stories with people's OpenAI AI keys leaking and then getting used. So it's another argument to run stuff on the back end. But yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I think also specifically to maybe there's a specific user that's just doing calls all day. I think that you can also make it so you know which user is making those calls. So if you have one user that's doing 90% of your API calls, that can kind of be something that especially I would say when you're starting out and figuring out how many users you're going to have. When you are setting it up on, let's just say OpenAI, you can set it so it's not automatically charging you too. So I would recommend that. But I think it is, especially when you're starting out, if you're getting users, it can go from just someone who's testing it to maybe you have 100 users. So the calls that you're making are obviously increasing. So yes, keeping an eye on it I think is really important. And I also just think having that be something that you as an admin, you as the owner of the app, can keep track of, so that you know if there's one user that's using all of it, why is that happening, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, on API keys, if your API key is in the plugin settings, then it's fine. If it's private in the API connector, it's fine. If it's an element on the page, then the user can see that. So that's the rule of thumb if you're working with a plugin and want to know how the API key is treated. In terms of cost, it's similar to workload usage in the sense that it's always going to be proportional to usage. So if you know that you're AI profitable at 100 users, you're going to be at 10,000 users as well, because costs should always scale proportionally. One of the things that I recommend if any of your apps that you build with AI is to have an AI log data type, and all that does is track who made the request, how much it costs you, any other stuff that you want to track, because that means that you can stick it in your admin panel and easily monitor your AI costs. Generally speaking, if your app is an AI app, that will be your highest cost, maybe in line with or higher than workload usage, so it's a key metric to keep track of.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on that is it is just something as you are creating your own app or founding, that is, I think, something that's a difference between building a traditional app versus building an app with AI is just that cost associated with using the API call. So it is something to keep in mind as you're building that there is a cost associated with it.
Absolutely, and pick the right model for the task. So 4.0 Mini is great for certain things, it's super cheap, and Anthropic is more expensive, but it's a high quality output. So I'll mix and match as well, just to manage those costs, because if you use Anthropic for everything, it would cost a lot.
Yeah, it's going to start costing you a lot then. But the Mini, I think, works great in a lot of use cases, especially as you're getting started.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for those amazing questions, and thanks to our amazing panel, Emily and George. And I hope we've helped inspire you to get out there and try more AI stuff in Bubble. There's just never been a more exciting time to be building software, building on Bubble with AI. I'm just so happy to be doing it, because it's, like we say, it blows our minds every week. So thanks everyone, and thanks to the panel.
Thank you.